Most people are told they need $1 million to be solid. But if we look at the internal circuitry of wealth, there's a much smaller, much more critical point of failure. It's a specific threshold where the structural integrity of your life actually changes. That number is $20,000. Think of your life like a smartphone. When you have $0 in the bank, you're essentially a device with a cracked screen and no waterproof rating. One drop, one unexpected repair or a medical bill, and the internal components are fried. You're fragile. You're operating in low power mode just to survive the day. But $20,000, that's the durability test milestone. At this level, we're adding a sapphire glass screen and a titanium frame to your financial build. We're moving from a device that breaks under pressure to one that's over-engineered for the real world. Most gurus want to talk about the shiny software at the end of the road, the Ferraris and the mansions. But today, we're going to look at the build quality. We're going to see why the first $20,000 is the Mohs scale of financial hardness. It's the point where your life stops being a fragile prototype and starts becoming a rugged, reliable machine. Let's see how much bend your current system has and how we can reinforce it. It's time to see what's happening underneath the hood. There is a specific coordinate in the financial landscape where the friction of poverty is finally overcome by the momentum of capital. That coordinate is $20,000. It is the first major step function in the human experience of wealth. It is the point where you move from being a resource for the market to becoming an allocator of capital. To understand why this number matters, we have to look at the escape velocity problem. In aerospace engineering, escape velocity is the minimum speed needed for an object to break free from the gravitational pull of a massive body. In finance, the gravitational pull of zero is the most powerful force on Earth. When you have zero net worth, every dollar you earn is spoken for by the friction of existence: rent, taxes, caloric intake, and transportation. This is a zero-sum game. You are running at a 1-to-1 ratio. You trade 1 hour of your life for a fixed amount of currency, and life immediately consumes that currency. The math of the first $20,000 is brutal because it is entirely unleveraged. If you have $100 and it grows by 10%, you made $10. That is a rounding error. It doesn't change your caloric intake or your housing situation. Therefore, the first $20,000 is almost entirely the result of pure labor and raw discipline. This is the hardest part of the journey because the feedback loop is broken. You are putting in 100 units of effort and receiving 0 units of capital momentum back. Most people quit at $5,000 because they think the math isn't working. They don't realize they are still in the atmosphere. They haven't hit the vacuum of space where movement becomes effortless. But the shift isn't just mathematical, it's cognitive. Poverty is a high-latency environment. When you are living paycheck to paycheck, your brain is constantly running a background program called survival mode. This program monitors whether you can pay the electric bill on Tuesday or if you can afford a $400 car repair. This background program consumes roughly 40% of your cognitive bandwidth. This is the scarcity tax. Because your brain is busy solving for Tuesday, it is physically incapable of solving for 10 years from now. At $20,000, that background program shuts down. You have achieved systemic redundancy. If an unexpected expense hits your system, you have the liquidity to absorb the shock without crashing the operating system. Once survival mode stops running, your brain suddenly has surplus bandwidth. For the first time, you start thinking about asymmetry, optimization, and leverage. You stop being the help and start being the house. Let's look at the internal rate of return. A quant doesn't ask, how much money do I have? They ask, how fast is my capital moving? For the first $20,000, you are the sole engine. For the second $20,000, your capital starts contributing. At 8% return, your first $20,000 is earning $1,600 a year. That's roughly $133 a month. While that doesn't sound like much, it is a 13% subsidization of your savings rate if you're saving $1,000 a month.
You are now running 13% faster than the person at zero with the same level of effort. This is where the compounding snowball begins to shrink the time to milestone exponentially. The first $20,000 might take 19 months. The second takes 17 months. The third takes 15 months. By the time you hit $400,000, that same $20,000 block of wealth generates itself every 5 months. The work per dollar ratio is collapsing. This is the only way to build true wealth, by making yourself obsolete in the wealth creation process. The most valuable thing $20,000 buys you isn't stuff, it's optionality. In finance, an option is the right but not the obligation to engage in a transaction. When you have zero, you have no options. You are an obligated actor. When you have 20,000, you have purchased the option of no. No, I will not work for a manager who disrespects me. No, I will not accept a subpar salary. No, I will not panic sell my assets. This liquidity also allows you to capture positive expected value. Wealthy people get richer because they can afford to play the long-duration game. If an investment has a 60% chance of doubling and a 40% chance of going to zero, it is a mathematically superior play. But if you only have $1,000 to your name, you cannot take that bet because the risk of ruin is too high. If you have 20,000, you can bet 1,000 on that play. If it goes to zero, your system survives. If it doubles, you've captured alpha. $20,000 is the minimum table stakes to start playing the games that actually build wealth. This leverage extends to your career. Most employees are short volatility. They are one performance review away from insolvency, which makes them terrified and easy to underpay. $20,000 changes your implied volatility. You are no longer fragile, you are robust. There is a measurable phenomenon where people who don't need their job actually perform better. Because they aren't afraid of being fired, they speak more clearly, take more creative risks, and demand more resources. This confidence alpha leads to faster promotions and higher bonuses. Having $20,000 in a high-yield account actually increases your earning potential in your day job. It is a psychological hedge that pays dividends in your salary. However, the trap most people fall into is using this first milestone to upgrade their status. A quant looks at a $600 car payment and sees a wealth destroyer. Over 30 years, that monthly payment invested at 8% is over $800,000. That SUV isn't costing you $40,000, it's costing you nearly $1 million in future liquidity. The person at 20,000 must resist the lifestyle creep algorithm. You must use your first 20,000 to upgrade your systems, not your image. Once you reach this threshold, your allocation becomes tactical. You maintain a core buffer of 5 to 10,000 for systemic insurance. You move the rest into momentum engines like broad market index funds, and you invest in human capital to increase your hourly rate. You must understand the tax drag and utilize every legal shelter available. A quant never pays more friction to the government than is required. Ultimately, $20,000 is the proof of concept for your entire financial life. It is the shift from being a consumer to being an owner. It is the transition from high time preference, wanting it now, to low time preference, wanting it later in a much larger quantity. If you can hold $20,000 without spending it on toys, you have passed the ultimate test of adulthood. You are standing at a fork in the road. You can spend your surplus and remain a component in the machine, stay vulnerable to variance, and fight gravity forever. Or you can aggressively pursue the $20,000 threshold. Build your buffer. Capture your freedom. The math is indifferent to your feelings. The market doesn't care about your hustle. It only cares about liquidity, leverage, and time. Start your sprint today. Your system depends on it.
Once you hit the $20,000 threshold, your relationship with your employer undergoes a fundamental power shift. In quantitative terms, you have moved from a short volatility position to a long delta position. When you have zero savings, you are forced to accept whatever terms are offered. You are a price taker.
But with $20,000 in liquid reserves, you become a price maker. This is what we call confidence alpha. It is the measurable increase in your professional value that occurs the moment you no longer desperately need the paycheck. This isn't about being arrogant or abrasive. It is about the optionality we discussed earlier. Because you have the capital to survive a 6-month search for a new role, your internal risk of ruin has vanished. This allows you to negotiate with a level of transparency and firmness that most employees simply cannot afford. Let's look at the tactical application of this leverage. Most people approach a salary negotiation as a plea for fairness. They say things like, "I've worked hard and I'd really appreciate a cost of living adjustment." This is a weak-form negotiation. It relies on the employer's benevolence. A quant-minded professional with $20,000 in the bank uses a different script. They focus on value arbitrage. When you enter a review, your script sounds like this. Over the last 12 months, I have optimized our internal processes to reduce latency by 15%, which has directly resulted in a measurable increase in output. Based on the current market data for this level of performance, the target compensation for this role is 20% higher than my current rate. I'd like to discuss how we can align my compensation with the value I'm delivering to the firm. Notice the shift. You aren't asking for a favor. You are presenting a data-driven case for an adjustment. If the employer says no, the person with zero savings feels a surge of cortisol and retreats into compliance. But your script for a no is different. You respond with, "I understand the current budget constraints. However, because my goal is to operate at a high leverage level, I'd like to revisit this in 90 days. In the meantime, let's define the specific metrics that would make a salary adjustment an obvious decision for the firm." This is a high-leverage move. You are setting a time-vested option. You are giving them 90 days to fix the discrepancy while you quietly observe the market. Because you have $20,000, you don't have to quit in a huff. You can stay, maintain your performance, and wait for a positive expected value exit. This leverage also applies to your time allocation. When you are living paycheck to paycheck, you're often forced into low-value busy work, the administrative tasks and late-night requests that consume your energy but don't build your resume. With your liquidity buffer, you can begin to push back on these low-leverage requests. Your script for protecting your time sounds like this. I can certainly take on that administrative task, but it will come at the expense of the high-impact project I'm currently finishing, which is projected to increase revenue by 10%. Which of these would you like me to prioritize for the firm's growth? By framing it as a choice between low-value work and high-impact growth, you force your manager to see you as a strategic asset rather than a utility. The ultimate career arbitrage is the exit interview. When you have $20,000, you don't have to wait for a better job to leave a toxic one. You can buy your own time to pivot into a higher-paying industry or a more advanced certification. You're essentially using your savings to fund your own research and development phase. The market pays a premium for those who can walk away. By building your $20,000 threshold, you're not just saving money, you're buying the most powerful tool in the corporate world, the ability to say no to a bad deal so you can say yes to a life-changing one. Having $20,000 doesn't just give you the power to say no, it gives you the capital to fund a strategic re-entry. In the world of high-stakes trading, firms often take a tactical drawdown, a deliberate pause to recalibrate their algorithms and hardware to stay competitive. Your career requires the same. Most people stay in stagnant industries because the cost of reskilling is too high. They cannot afford the 3-month gap in pay required to attend an intensive program, earn a high-tier certification, or build a solo venture. They are trapped by their own burn rate. When you have $20,000, you can execute a controlled career pivot. This is not a reckless quitting in a vacuum. This is a calculated arbitrage where you trade a portion of your liquid capital for a permanent increase in your human capital value. Your tactical pivot plan follows a three-stage sequence: the baseline audit, the skill acquisition phase, and the market re-entry. First, you perform the baseline audit. You calculate your survival burn rate, the absolute minimum cost to keep your system running. If your expenses are $3,000 a month, your $20,000 fund gives you a 6-month runway. This is your safety margin. Stage 2 is the skill acquisition phase. Instead of spending your evenings exhausted from a job you hate, you use your runway to buy back your time. Your script for this phase is internal. I am allocating $5,000 of my liquidity to cover 2 months of living expenses while I dedicate 40 hours a week to mastering a high-leverage skill, whether that is quantitative analysis, software architecture, or specialized sales. By dedicating full-time hours to learning, you compress 2 years of part-time struggle into 8 weeks of hyper-growth. You're effectively buying time at a discount to sell your skills later at a premium. This is the definition of a high-yield investment. Stage 3 is the market re-entry. Because you aren't desperate, you don't have to take the first offer that comes your way. You can navigate the interview process as a consultant rather than a supplicant. When a recruiter asks about your gap in employment, your script is precise and high status. I reached a plateau in my previous role where the opportunity for technical growth was lagging behind my performance. I made the strategic decision to take a self-funded sabbatical to master specialized skills in data systems. I am now looking for a firm where that specific expertise can be leveraged for high-impact results. This response signals 3 things to an employer. You are financially disciplined, you are self-directed, and you are rare. You have moved from a commodity labor pool into a specialized talent pool. The tactical pivot is the ultimate proof of the $20,000 threshold. You use the money as a bridge, not a cushion. You didn't spend it on a vacation to escape your life. You spent it on the infrastructure to upgrade your life. Remember, wealth is not built by working harder at the same level. It is built by jumping to higher levels of leverage. $20,000 is the fuel for that jump. It is the difference between being a passenger on someone else's flight and being the pilot of your own. The math is finished. The scripts are ready. The only remaining variable in the equation is your execution.
We have analyzed the physics of the start. We have calculated the velocity of capital. We've explored the strategic leverage of the no, and we've mapped the tactical pivot to a higher career ceiling. But at the end of the day, all the math in the world is useless without a change in the internal software of the person holding the capital. The most dangerous lie in the financial world is that wealth is a number. Wealth is not a number. Wealth is a state of systemic independence. It is the moment you realize that the world no longer has a claim on your time unless you choose to trade it. $20,000 is the exact point where that independence begins to take root. Most people will spend their entire lives as reactive actors. They react to the bill in the mail. They react to the mood of their boss. They react to the whims of the economy. They are the noise in the market. By hitting this threshold, you become the signal. When you have $20,000, you are no longer a victim of the variance of life. You have moved from a fixed mindset to a probability mindset. You no longer ask, "Can I afford this?" You ask, "What is the expected value of this allocation?" You stop looking for a job and start looking for an arbitrage. This shift is permanent. Once you see the world through the lens of liquidity and leverage, you can never go back to being a blind consumer. You have seen behind the curtain. You know that the matrix of the 9-to-5 grind is fueled by the zero-balance bank accounts of the masses. You have chosen to stop being the fuel and started being the engine. Do not be distracted by those who are further ahead.
The person with $1,000,000 is just a person who successfully navigated their first 20,000 and had the discipline not to kill the momentum. The only difference between you and them is a function of time and consistency. The hard part is over. The escape velocity has been reached. Your task now is simple. Protect the seed, feed the engine, ignore the noise. You are no longer working for money. You are building a system where money works for you. That is the only game worth playing. That is the definition of freedom. The threshold is set. The math is clear. Now, go execute.